Greetings. I'm Bob Clark, president of Husson University, and it's my privilege to welcome you to this installment of the 2022-23 Distinguished Speaker Series. To navigate the waters of our data and algorithm-driven economy, businesses must continually acquire new information and turn that knowledge into strategy. To facilitate this process, Husson University, home to the largest college of business in the state of Maine, is pleased to continue to present the Distinguished Business Speaker Series. This series, launched in conjunction with the opening of Husson's new College of Business building, Harold Alfont Hall, includes dynamic speakers from a variety of disciplines ranging from banking, government, and security to management, marketing, and more. Its main objective is to educate students, alumni, and community members on the challenges facing businesses and related professions, as well as to inspire those who will become our future leaders. Today, we welcome Matthew McHatten. Mr. McHatten joined MMG Insurance in 2001, and as of January 1st of this year, he is the president and CEO of the company. Previously, he served as Executive Vice President, Chief Operating Officer, Secretary and Clerk, Senior Vice President of External Operations, Vice President, and Marketing Director. Mr. McHatten holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration and Finance from the University of Maine and also has attended several executive development programs. He was previously employed by KeyBank's Corporate Banking Division as a Vice President and Relationship Manager. Mr. McHatten is a board member and past chair of the board of the Aroostook Partnership and serves on the Strategic Communication Council of the National Association of Mutual Insurance Companies, NAMIC. He is past chair and member of the University of Maine School of Business Advisory Board, past chair and member of NAMIC's Management Conference Board, and past chair of the Aroostook Partnership. He is a past member of the Hartford Steam Boiler Advisory Board, past president and past member of the Presque Isle Rotary Club, and past president and member of the Board of Directors of the Central Aroostook Association. Mr. McHatten is a Rotary International Paul Harris Fellow, recipient of the NAMIC Merit Award, and was named in 2010 to Maine Business's Next List, an award presented annually to 10 individuals recognized as being influential in the future of Maine's economy. In 2019, Mr. McHatten was awarded the prestigious President Abram W. Harris Award by the University of Maine Foundation. I'll now turn the series over to Dean Marie Hanson for her interview of Mr. McHatten. Thank you.
Thank you, President Clark. Well, welcome, Matt.
Thanks. Great to be here. Great to be here. I got to work on that bio a little bit. That's a little long. Maybe we can shorten that up some. But, yeah.
Well, so I may take you back through it, and we can decide what you don't want to talk about and what you do want to talk about.
Sure.
Does that sound fair?
Yeah, that sounds fine.
Well, I just want to say thank you for joining us at Husson today. And I know you had a lunch before this with some students. Yeah. And was that a good opportunity for you to see what we're doing here?
Yeah, it was fantastic. And they're here right now. They asked awesome questions. In fact, I asked them before we get started of what I should bring up, what I talked to them about. So I've got a few feedback loops from what they heard to share with everybody else. So it was a great experience.
Well, we're certainly proud of them, and we appreciate you coming here. Obviously, a long-term relationship for Husson with MMG as well, but I'm kind of here to hear about your journey, and so I'd like to take you back perhaps to a first job and think about Matt back then versus Matt now. What were you thinking back then when you were going to get that first job, and what was it?
So we talked about it a little bit with the group beforehand, and I kind of fell into my first job. It wasn't my intention. But one of the things I did, and a member of the group earlier had been doing the same thing, which I think is a great idea for any of you out exploring career. She'd had 20 interviews thus far. I did the same thing at UMaine. The Career Center had some sign-up sheets, and I signed up for every single interview I could, whether or not I was qualified. And I did it from the perspective that I wanted to be able to have as much experience to see as many type of organizations and then get good at interviewing as well. So I went through that process, actually was quite a ways down the selection of a management training program with a very prominent Maine company. It was going to be based here in Bangor. And it came down to myself and another individual, and I didn't get the job.
Ah.
And boy, it was tough because I had made my mind up that I was going to be in this business and be part of this company. Great company today, just, a choice had to be made.
Right.
So through all these interviews, my mother worked in banking. She worked for KeyBank. And so KeyBank was on campus, and I signed up for an interview. And interviewed on campus, kind of liked it. They brought me down to the headquarters at that point in time, which were in Augusta. And I interviewed with the head of HR, and it went pretty well. And so as I'm coming out of the interview, in those days, KeyBank was based right downtown on Water Street, Augusta. So they're up on like the 6th floor where the executive offices were. So I got on the elevator with this guy. Had no clue who he was. He introduced himself. Hi, I'm Richard Molyneux. What's your name? I said, I'm Matt McHatten. He says, well, what are you doing here today? And he said, I said, well, I was here for an interview. And he said, geez, how'd you like it? How'd it go? And I said, well, it went okay. I don't know if I could ever see myself in banking, but it was good. I enjoyed it. I'm kind of thinking differently about it. I've got some other offers. And he and I just chatted, changed pleasantries, got to the first floor, and went on my way. So I drive back to campus. I get back to my apartment, and one of my roommates said, hey, your mother just called you. So, of course, when you're in college, you're going down through that inventory of, okay, what have I done in the past week that she might be calling me about? And so I called her back, and she said, were you in Augusta today at KeyBank headquarters? I'm like, yep. She said, what were you doing there? I said, well, I had an interview. She said, did you meet somebody on the elevator? I'm like, yeah, I met this guy. I can't remember his name. I think it was Richard something, and, he was really friendly and enjoyed the conversation. She said, you know who that was? I'm like, no, I have no idea who it was. She says, the CEO of the bank. And he wants to talk to you next week.
About why you don't want to be in banking.
Exactly. Like,
Right,
and I'm like, boy, I wish I would have handled that conversation a little bit differently. Suffice to say, two things came out of that relative to a first career, and I'll get on to really answering the question here in a second. But when we talked about it as a group earlier, these couple things resonated. Number one, you never know who you're going to make an impression on, right? And even that micro opportunity of just engagement created an opportunity, right? The second thing that I took away from that, something I think about today, is he was incredibly accessible. And I'm like, you know what? If I ever get to be a CEO of a company, I want to be accessible. Because that really sold it for me when I went to work there. I'm like, if the CEO cares this much about a senior at UMaine coming into their management trainee program, he must care a lot about people. So went to work there. I went back to Presque Isle for the summer. That was my intention. And then to go off to Portland or elsewhere. And 33 years later, I'm still there. But it was a great first career. Banking is a great way to learn a lot about a lot of different businesses. I love my job there and really enjoyed it.
And you had some doubts about going into banking, which I think is a good lesson for students, is you just never know what that experience could be like, or you have a perception of that particular career, but it turned out differently.
Yeah, and I think, we talk a lot about it as we do a lot with the University of Maine Business School and a lot with career in Aroostook County. When you're 20, 21, 22 years old, you don't have any life experience. You know what a doctor does, or you know what a engineer does maybe, but everything else is kind of much more elusive. And I think by virtue of that interaction, by virtue of talking to so many different companies, I kind of started to get a clue of what was going to be right for me. And I also started to tune into what was that engagement like. And that's a pretty good looking glass into what it's going to be like to work there.
And I know that the people side of business is super important to you, so I plan to revisit that.
Okay.
Your major was business, though, when you were an undergrad?
Yeah, finance.
And from that standpoint, you had seen yourself going in that trajectory towards business of some kind. There's certainly students that don't know, and so you're obviously using that business degree, but what if you had done something different? Do you ever think of the what if or what you didn't do with that college piece?
Yeah, I at the time when I was coming out of Maine, I was really more fixated on other types of finance.
Okay.
Of course, most finance students, they want to go to Wall Street.
Right. Right.
And that really wasn't my intention. But I think the thing that was different for me, Marie, about that point in time is that it was the first time in my life that I said, you know what, I really want to be in Maine. I want to stay in Maine. I really started to appreciate what it was like to live in Maine. You know, coming out of school and wanting to get away and go on to bigger things. Right. That last couple years at UMaine, through some experiences and then coming in and working with a lot of different businesses in Maine, I'm like, you know what, I want to stay here. It's really important to me.
And whatever that nugget was, that hook that kept you here, you're obviously glad because you're still here 33 years later and kind of professing what I do, being from Bangor, this is a great place to be working. So you stayed in banking for a while. Mm-hmm. Then what? What took you out of banking? What did that look like for you?
Well, it was kind of an interesting time. I think I had what you call a mid-career crisis, so to speak. You know, it didn't involve any type of...
I mean, you were 29 when this happened?
I was 33, actually.
Okay, so right in that area, okay.
Yeah, so bank was going really well.
Yeah.
I had a great client base, was doing deals all over Maine, getting into some bigger stuff outside of the state. The bank was changing a bit, and maybe I was changing a little bit relative to what I wanted in career. My boss at the time left, went to another bank. A short time later, I was offered his job, and I went home and I talked to my wife about it, and I'm like, you know, this is like one of those times I could feel intuitively it was time to take a look at where I was and where I wanted to be. So I went in the next day and I resigned.
Wow, that's. I was going to say what was missing, and you decided there was something missing.
Well, you know, and I just to be fully transparent, I had other jobs that were being offered when my boss left. You know, banking is very dynamic that way.
Right.
But I'm like, you know what? I can't stay here if I'm not all in. And I said, you know, I got to take a month or so and figure out where I'm headed.
Yeah.
And that was tough. Very honorable in the moment. After the paycheck stopped, it was really kind of interesting.
Well, and I know you well enough to know that you need to be busy and you need to be doing things. So I actually can't imagine you in that time frame.
Well, I threw myself into what was next. And ironically, how it all worked out, I was going to probably stay in banking, and I was looking at banks in Maine that were based in Maine, a couple outside. Had a couple clients that I had been talking to through the years. But I just kept thinking about what was important. I think that was the big thing. It wasn't necessarily where I was going to do. It was more about what I wanted out of my career.
Sure.
And actually, MMG came along late.
Okay.
Our CEO at the time, Larry Shaw, just as a matter of more disclosure, they were a client of mine when I was at the bank. I actually lost them to another bank, which was a tough moment. But he called me one day and he said, and I was almost ready to make a decision. He said, hey, I want to have lunch with you. I'm like, well, Larry, I'm kind of busy. I don't know if you know, I resigned. I don't have a job. I'm trying to figure it out. He's like, no, I think we ought to have lunch. So we had lunch at his house and he talked about MMG, where it was going, his vision, and my potential part in it. I came back. It was still a tough decision, but I had a really good friend that he and I sat down and he said, okay, what I want you to do is write down everything that's important to you. Yeah. Then write the employers across the top of the page. Then rank everything 1 to 10. Put it away. Get up the next morning. Do the same thing.
Yeah.
He said that'll be your answer because I was really struggling. Well, I did that. MMG came up both times, so I took the job.
What were a couple of things in that list that were important to you?
I wanted to be in senior leadership.
Okay.
I wanted to be in a small to mid-sized company that was growing, so somewhere where I could make a difference within that.
Sure.
I wanted to be able to continue to apply and build relationships because that's a big part of me, and the people connection was really important.
Right.
I wanted to stay in the county if I could. Again, I was doing some inventory around that, and the county's a very special place to me. My oldest daughter, Shay, was 3 at the time, so I wanted to raise her there. That necessarily wasn't going to happen 100%, but that was a big consideration. And then I just really thought about mission and central to what I enjoyed doing, which was obviously finance and corporate transactions and
Sure.
analytical stuff.
So when we say finance and corporate transactions, yet an insurance company came up. So can you talk a little bit about how that came up ranked higher for you?
Yeah, so well, obviously, insurance is a lot about financial underpinnings. And
Right.
what people don't realize quite a bit about insurance is we have this whole thing called reinsurance, where we hedge and mitigate our risk over the top, which is very much like a financial transaction. So
Right.
I was pretty well adept at that. And then MMG had just formed a mutual holding company. It was going to start to raise capital. So I'd had some experience in that as well. Then the other aspect was working with our agents. I really enjoyed the client interaction when I was at KeyBank, and that kind of sold it for me, is working with the, a couple hundred agents, 500 offices that we have that sell our products.
Well, and some of that is, my purpose of that question is just kind of getting out there what's available in the insurance industry, because I think, as you mentioned, perhaps if you're a current student, you may not know what it actually looks like. There are actually, you can correct me if I'm wrong, are there any movies that would make the insurance industry hot for them to have watched? Or
Boy, I don't know.
I
didn't think about that one.
So without that, I think the hearing from you that choice and what was important to you, fast forward, here you are today, but when you entered MMG with Larry, what was the role that he wanted you to take?
So my role was marketing director, which in our case, it wasn't traditional branding. It was the management of our distribution system, which is independent agents, at that time scattered across Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont.
Okay, so that does sound different than perhaps what a marketing major would be looking at. So that's an interesting piece.
Yeah, and it was all about distributing our product, growing with them, increasing the value of our franchise in their offices.
Yeah.
And then it had the other component, which was more corporate strategy, finance.
Okay.
So it was, in a smaller company, you get to wear multiple hats.
Yes.
And they kind of adapted the role around where my strengths were, which was another reason why I went there.
And that's fun for you, right? I mean, I think just knowing you again, I would say that if you had to do just one thing, that might not work.
Oh, that wouldn't be good at all. We were talking about, one of the students brought up COVID and that whole time period. I was home for about 6 weeks, and it was very difficult, very difficult. And I was doing tons of Zoom meetings and Teams meetings, but this type of interaction really is where I get my energy and get a lot of my fulfillment in my job, is making connections.
So out of the roles that you've had prior to the current one at MMG, what has been the biggest challenge for you?
I think the biggest challenge is that you always got to be adapting and changing.
Okay.
And the business world is moving really fast now. In fact, it's no longer a point on the horizon anymore that we're preparing for. We have to build organizations that are flexible and nimble. So I think that challenge, as well, I thought I knew everything about leadership and management when I ended up there. And I quickly found out that I didn't. And at each step of the way of leadership, it's demanded different things from me.
Sure.
And what I was doing as chief operating officer versus what I'm doing as CEO is totally different.
Yes.
And that's something you really have to dig deep sometimes and let go of certain things to focus on others and go after things that aren't as comfortable.
So have you been able to let go?
I'm working on it. I'm working on it. Yeah, I think, operations was, of all the jobs that I've had, I love that job.
Right.
Because I was in the nuts and bolts of everything that was going on in the company. Everything reported up through to me with the exception of accounting. So HR, underwriting, claims, tech, marketing, every day, fast-paced. And
Right.
one of the things that I had to learn, and one of the things I did in the couple years preceding Larry's departure, is we were pretty flat as an organization previously, but he and I talked a lot about it. That wasn't going to suffice going forward. Everything coming up, the chief operating officer and going to him as president, we almost had to flip it upside down and push it down. So we've developed a much more well-defined senior staff now that's taken on bigger chunks, which has helped me let go.
And that's an interesting piece, because then you're seeing multiple people doing things that you might have been doing in the past.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, one of the things we were talking about, I was talking with one of our managers this week, which is I've had a hard time to let go and delegate. I know, Maria, you don't have a hard time with it at all.
No, not at all. Yeah, it's easy. Nobody laugh in the audience at this point.
Right. So I have this dear friend, you've met her, Margaret Greenberg, who's helped me through some of this. She's an executive coach. And, nobody wants to sometimes delegate because it's seen as you're giving them your burden, right? Or you're giving them your work.
The monkey on your back.
Right. Like,
Yes.
oh, this is hard. I'm going to give it to somebody else, make their life worse. Nobody really wants to do that. And she said, well, you got to think about it differently. You got to think about you're giving them a gift to show the best of themselves. So you reframe that thought process from a burden to a gift. Who doesn't want a gift, right? Who doesn't want to give a gift? And so I was talking to one of our managers this week about it, and she tried it on in a committee meeting, and she said the enthusiasm was incredible. So a lot of it, you just got to keep reframing your thought process.
Right.
It,
And I think that's also about owning responsibility and then instead thinking about, well, it's actually my responsibility to continue this company or to continue it. And so I know that you're a big proponent of growing other individuals. So that makes sense to wrap in that way.
Yeah, and I think you got to put it in your own position too. In your life, when you get something that allows you to be at your best, that's a pretty good moment.
Yeah.
So to think about it that way is important.
So we've talked a little bit about how this new role, which beginning of the year, you've known this is coming.
Yeah.
For how many years now have you known?
It was a little over about 2.5.
2.5.
Yeah, and which sounds like a long time, but it went by fast.
Right.
Yeah, but I had the luxury of a couple years to start to figure out what we're going to look like.
And during that 2.5 years, we were in COVID.
Yeah.
And then you're dealing with this transition to potentially a CEO, not knowing coming out of COVID.
Right.
I think the last time I saw you, you just flown in from somewhere out west. So you are traveling a lot in this role now, because that's different than during COVID, of course.
Yeah.
And how has that felt for you, going to all of the locations that MMG is connected with?
For me, that's a big part of our value proposition as a company, and it's been me forever. I enjoy it.
Yeah.
Although it can be a drag at times. The month of March, my wife and I counted it up the other night. I was gone 22 days in March,
Ooh. Yeah.
which was a lot for that month. But we like doing business face to face. We like connecting. We like to sit down and work things through that way. I will say though, what we learned and what we got competent in COVID, certainly in our company, has made things more effective too. Like a Zoom meeting can be effective for a lot of things.
Right.
We learned how to survive in that type of environment. So if you can complement it along with the people-to-people side when you need it, make you pretty effective as an organization.
Right, right. And that's part of the culture piece that I wanted to talk to you about, because that's been part of your journey, is what is the culture for MMG? And if you were to answer that question right now, how would you describe it?
Well, I was talking to the group beforehand because they asked me the same question, which is really good questions, by the way. They warm me up well for
Thank you guys.
So we have a really unique culture. And so Larry and I would get that question from people in the past. And we would answer it, but we would kind of fumble around with the answer because it was kind of second nature.
Yes.
And so with Larry's departure and me coming in, and then the company is just growing significantly. And one of the things you want to really watch is you lose your culture as you get bigger.
Right.
I said, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to make sure that we hardwire and make really visible what our culture is? So what we did was we sat down over the course of about a year and defined our culture's values.
Okay.
Because that's really what drives your culture, is what you believe in and what you value as an organization. So we built 6 values around that, and we've been reinforcing them out there and talking to our employees, holding up when we see them exemplified. Every quarterly meeting, we have a quarterly meeting with all our employees. I do values awards.
Oh, okay.
So I talk about employees that have, or groups of employees that have exhibited that. Nice. And then I talk about the fact that we all own culture. Like, it isn't just me. Everybody in this organization owns the culture, but if you're going to ask them to be accountable to it, you've got to give them values and things to work with of what does it look like.
And what it means to them
Right.
as well to have that conversation, because you're not only in Presque Isle. So the challenge of having multiple locations, what those values mean in those locations, are they different, or do you want them to be assimilated to one cohesive organization?
We want them to be assimilated, and I'm really proud of the fact that if you go into Portsmouth, New Hampshire, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, or Richmond, Virginia, it's the same.
Okay.
But a lot of that is who you hire, what you reward, what you believe in,
Sure.
certainly the values. But that's really key to our franchise because we participate in a marketplace that's got a lot of competition. And the values also drive the value proposition to our policyholders and to our agents.
Right.
So all that's got to be working together to make sure that we keep that competitive advantage.
And it's a challenge, right, to be hiring right now. So how do you put forward, I mean, there's a balance for money, but what other things are you putting out there that you value and that the employees will find value in?
Well, money is important, but it's proven out to be not the most important thing. It's kind of an ante. You've got to be in the ballpark regardless. But why people come to work for us, of course, it means different things for different people. But our atmosphere of team, what we believe in relative to family,
Sure.
community, the environment that we try to build, the fact that we're growing. I think we had 32 promotions in the first quarter.
Okay.
A lot from within. That's really what we're seeking out in job candidates, that they attach to that. The other thing we've been very successful at is bringing in individuals from the outside into Presque Isle, to our home office. The fellow who took my place came from Houston, Texas.
Yes, right.
And he
And
likes
David seems happy there, right?
Oh yeah, you look at what we have to offer. He's got 2 daughters in our school system, which is very strong. He's kind of tired of traffic,
Sure.
the heat, the hurricanes.
Yeah, I see none of those there, so
No.
that makes sense.
Especially not the heat at times. But yeah, and he likes it so much. His mother and father moved up too.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
But as we think about recruiting in people that value community, value the outdoors, safety, schools, certain things that come with more densely populated area,
Right.
we have a lot to offer, and I think Maine has a lot to offer.
Yes.
Sometimes we don't put that forth though, like we should. We think less of ourselves in Maine than we should. It's one of the things that I've seen going outside. I'm out into our other states a lot, out in the Midwest a lot. Maine is seen as a special place
Right.
of hardworking, honest, kind of rugged individualism. And when you think about it, how many states really have that kind of brand? And I think it's an underutilized thing for us in Maine, and we ought to think a little better of ourselves.
Well, and I do think that we see that sometimes we want students to be aware that they can compete and succeed wherever they go. And that's something that comes from that main perspective of what I also say is here is humility, right? And I often hear that when I'm talking to you as well. When it comes to leadership, I know you said that that was one of your goals, and that's why you made the transition to MMG. It's what you were looking for all along. What made you want to pursue leadership? Was there a moment for you when you were younger?
I don't know. I think I always liked being part of a team and moving things forward.
Okay. Despite the challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I always, in fact, maybe I'm a little odd in that way. I embrace the challenges. That's when one of the things, the mantras that I try to live by is that you got to be at your best when times are at their worst. And you got to embrace those situations. You can't lament them. You can't hope or wish they hadn't happened.
Right.
So I always enjoyed that. And I was really kind of team-oriented person. Played sports in high school and played on team sports when going on in college and beyond. I like that whole feel to it. I think the other thing for me is we all have a legacy relative to our work. I wanted to make sure that what I did mattered, and that's probably why I headed in that direction.
To choose leadership, and that ties to the people piece that's so important to you.
Yeah, and it's not about leading or dictating people. It's it's finding ways for them to be at their best. Again, back to that whole mantra.
Right.
Yep.
Right. I mean, I certainly find that fulfillment. Like you kind of see the light go on for them, or they find a path, and you're like, oh, that's wonderful, and proud moment for you at that.
Yeah, for sure.
Speaking of proud, or maybe less proud, let's talk about success and let's talk about failure and kind of how you put that into your head. Is there a really high success and a really low failure, and where that feels for you, what that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have great answers for either. I'm not, and maybe it's a little bit of a thing with me at times, but we achieve success, we celebrate success, then we move on.
Perhaps too quickly?
No, we're pretty good at it, MMG.
Are you good?
Yeah, we're pretty good at it. One of the things we do is when we have a successful, whatever it may be, an award, we celebrate as a company.
And that's, I think that ongoing regard and taking a break to say, we did something that's worthwhile, because we miss it otherwise. Like you said, you just move on.
Yeah. But I think for me, the success, so just give an example, and I sent them all an email this morning before I left Presque Isle. We're in the midst of a massive technology investment, millions and millions and millions of dollars, and it's been a grind. It's been really rough.
Sure.
But we're almost through it. And so we had a meeting yesterday. It was part Teams, part in person, so people scattered all over the place. And I came away from that meeting, I'm like, wow, we're doing really great work. And the individuals that were on that call, I know all of them when they started at MMG.
Oh,
and they're like in major roles now. And a lot of them are from the county, but not all of them. So I sent them a note this morning. I'm like, I'm really proud of the work we're doing. And so for me, success is that. When we do great work and when I see people achieve things that certainly I can't, because I don't have the technical expertise.
Sure.
But what they're taking after and how they're doing it. So that success has shown up in a number of ways, but it all comes back to me to people. And seeing people love what they do, love who they do it with, and exceed maybe even what they thought they could deliver in themselves. Failure side, I've had a bunch of setbacks and things I wish I would have done differently. And I think the one thing with me at times is that I don't take failure as an option and maybe hang on a little too long.
Okay.
Or as well, maybe come in too quickly when people are struggling. And I think one of the things for growth, and I think it's harder and harder at times, but you got to struggle a little bit at times to get that experience and grow.
Right. So that's the letting go part again, is allowing people to learn from that piece, right?
Make mistakes.
And so, and as I know, you definitely have a fix-it mentality. So to not fix it for them, that's hard too.
It is. But yeah, I would say that the other thing that I've probably failed at is I put a lot of time in. I work insane amounts of time, and early in my career, I just blew through my 20s, and I was lucky to meet my wife, and she's kept me in balance and made sure that I don't get too far out of balance. But what happens in leadership at times is you get totally, like last month, 22 days in March, and part of sitting down with her is, okay, how are we going to make sure that we can get through this month at the same time, figure out how we're going to have balance. So balance for me is something that I haven't been real great at.
What does that look like, though, if you were to be great at it? What would that look like for the future?
Be shutting off more. I think that's the big thing, and one of the trappings of business today is you're always on, you're always connected.
Right.
But shutting off more, and I'm finding as CEO I'm able to do that because people are taking on more and more. Taking a little more time off for things that we like to do as a family. And just maybe not thinking you've got to work as hard to still accomplish the same thing.
It's so interesting, I think, with the dopamine effect and where we're just trying to get that constant either response or we're feeling like, oh no, the anxiety of not responding quick enough. And so it's certainly a challenge. With the challenges, we kind of talked about COVID a little bit, but right now, is that still presenting challenges for the business?
I think we're through it. I almost hesitate to say that,
I know.
given where we've been in the last couple of
We're
years.
gonna cross our fingers right now, right?
We worked really hard to figure out where we were going with it. And the whole transition from moving everybody out of the company. I was telling the students a little earlier, March 16th was an apocalyptic day. I watched people leave the company with their stuff under their arms, pushing their chairs out.
Just probably felt like they were leaving permanently.
Yeah, of course we didn't know, but
No. Well, 2 weeks. I mean, that was the deal.
yeah,
right?
we all thought 2 weeks. But the one thing that we were rallying around at that point in time and continued the next several months is we have to keep people safe.
Right.
Like everything else is secondary now. Let's keep our
Yes.
people safe. And they responded just incredibly well. And one of the things we learned through COVID is an area that I really wanted to do and couldn't figure out how was to provide a hybrid work schedule.
Sure.
Work from home and work in the office. And I couldn't figure out how to be equitable with it. Like, how do I go to one department and say, yeah, you can do it, and go to another department and say you can't? And equity and inclusion is a big part of our organization.
Sure.
So COVID allowed us to figure it out. As
Yeah.
they say, necessity is the mother of invention.
That's right.
And we figured that out. We did feel, though, as the impacts and the risks subsided, that being together was important. Because we're growing, we're very collaborative, very team-oriented. So we have a hybrid schedule now of 3 days in. And we're still adapting on that. I think the engagement model for workforce has totally changed. And, almost like we want to make sure we're caring for our employees more because we're seeing them less.
Right.
So we're investing a ton of money in well-being, engagement strategies, communication strategies to adapt, because we want it to work as well, because we see some definite benefit in where we are.
And you definitely take that piece for the employee well-being. I see that through the education opportunities that you're providing for your employees, whether they're coming here to Husson, they're doing continuing education pieces with trainings, leadership, et cetera. So that's an important part of their well-being too.
Yeah, so well-being always was physical wellness was the primary, and
Right.
we've taken that to a whole new level with 5 different areas of well-being.
Okay.
And we're working with Barry Dunn, which is a prominent accounting firm in Southern Maine. They've done a phenomenal job. Any of you are business people and want to start to think about this differently, I'd be happy to give you a referral. And the other aspect of kind of inclusion and equity in our organization, we want to make sure everybody can bring their whole selves to work.
Yeah.
And well-being is about their whole self. So it's
Right.
not just physical, it can be financial, it can be community. And we want to make sure we're following what we should as an employer to support that.
And that's a balance too, right? Of giving and getting from that standpoint. How do you stay in this role now inspired as the CEO?
That's a good question. I think I'm inspired by the people that are around us, our agency partners,
Okay.
the other partners that we have. It was interesting. I had a guy fly in last night from Connecticut, investment banker, and sat with him for a couple hours and came up with like 2 or 3 new ideas about where we should be going with InsurTech and different things.
Sure.
So I get my inspiration from working with people. And then, we're pretty ambitious as an organization.
Right.
We see growth coming. We see the potential to continue to leverage what we have to hire success. I have a great board of directors.
Okay.
Very diverse thought leaders, and they inspire me as well. We just had a board meeting last week, and they're pushing me and challenging
Sure.
me, but they're bringing all these perspectives in that are so important to just building a great company.
Yeah, so asking the what if, because insurance could be isolated to certain areas, and if you can go beyond that, obviously the reinsurance portion of your business is a whole other ballgame as we deal with Mother Nature and all the other risks involved. So let me ask you that question, risk. How you look at risk, perhaps from an insurance lens, you've looked at risk in your own lifetime. How should students out there look at risk, and what should they be thinking about?
Yeah, so if you ask my daughters, I have a 24-year-old and 20-year-old, they say that Dad what ifs everything.
Oh.
You know, I can't walk into a place and say like, is that cord hanging down?
Right.
Did somebody trip over that? Or so it's an awful affliction.
Well, and I'll make the comparison because you wouldn't hold the set of scissors while we were doing a ribbon cutting.
Right. Yeah.
Because
Exactly.
give them to the lawyer, not the insurance guy.
Yeah.
So
Right. Yeah. I wanted to make sure you had them. But yeah, so risk at a young age. I think that one of the things that I see is sometimes not assessing it and utilizing the people around you to bounce it off. You know, I see a lot of risk at times, you know, within social media and things that are posted to social media.
Sure.
And I think about myself back when, you know, I was, thank God there wasn't social media.
no social media, yes, absolutely.
But stuff follows you around. And as well, I think at times as a society, we're kind of a little bit too superficial in how we assess what might be in the future. I'd say for younger folks, one of the things that was really instrumental to me was having mentors that could kind of feed back on me and let me know when I was maybe creating risk or not on the right track. I told him really a funny story about when I was at UMaine, and one of my mentors was a finance professor, Dennis McHatten. I still talk to him today. And so I came in my senior year, and I was all gung-ho. I want to get a job, get a career. And so I would go see him and bounce things off him. And so this particular day I went in, and back then you could smoke in the administrative offices. Shows how long ago it was.
Right.
And so I came in, I'm like, Dr. McCollum, I'm so excited about my future. And, you know, what's one thing that I can do to make myself more marketable and get a job? And I remember he was sitting in his chair and he puffed on his cigarette and he looked at me and he nodded his head and he looked at me and said, you know what? You need to get a haircut. That was it. But again, you know, he's like, hey, you're going into the business world. You know, you got to kind of start to break out of the college atmosphere. And
Sure. So you listened because it looks okay.
I did. Yeah, that was the last time I had long hair, I think, ever. But the mentoring aspect, I've always really benefited from that.
Sure.
And I still have mentors today that I bounce things off of.
How do you get them today versus when you were younger? Obviously, the faculty exist as options for mentors, but...
Yeah, I think, you know, I don't ever see it being like, hey, you're my mentor. It comes from
That's scary if somebody walks up to you and
Yeah,
says
right,
that.
yeah.
Like, I have that responsibility.
it's more a relationship thing.
Sure.
And I was lucky. So I was a commercial banker and dealing with a lot of really great business people that I would build relationships with, but I was always trying to bring something. I wasn't always taking things. So as far as, you know, information and then reinforcing when they said something to me that I learned a lesson along the way. So I've been lucky. I've always had a bunch of different mentors that, but it's the environment and taking the time to sit down. I always have a list of questions to ask.
So that's a good preparatory piece.
Yeah, and it created a two-way, and those relationships still exist today. I went to see one of my friends, who's one of my mentors, last week. And you know, and one of the things I did when I sat down, I said, I want to tell you how important you were to me at that point. You know, so I think mentoring is a really important thing.
Absolutely.
I just can't really tell you how to do it.
How to do it, yeah.
I've challenged myself on that. Now we have at MMG, we have mentoring for our emerging leaders.
Okay.
And what we try to do is match up strengths and skill sets needs, and it works out pretty well.
Yeah.
We use our senior leadership for it, and it's had a really strong effect.
And if that doesn't exist, then it is really the onus is on others to seek out, you know, perhaps where they're interested in different areas and finding a professor or finding something else that might be a great way to bounce ideas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I want to be cognizant that we may have some questions from the audience. So if you do have a question, I'm going to impose upon you to come up to our microphone. So that's going to be the challenge, just so that we pick it up. We do have several people that are watching us remote, speaking of our connection in the COVID world. So is anybody brave enough to ask a question that might come down? If not, I'll call on you. No.
Well, while we're doing it, so I asked the students what resonated.
Oh, yes, so please tell me that.
And so it was two things. They asked me really good questions about interviews, going into job interviews. And how to provide the best impression. And so you're like, resume, professional presence, that's kind of like, that's table stakes, right?
The given, yeah.
But one of the things I said to them is that impresses us as an organization is when somebody comes in and they know something about who we are and ask questions about us.
Yep.
And
So having done their research.
right. And they
Yes.
don't have to be like super duper complicated questions. That shows engagement, right?
For sure.
So, if you're going in interviewing for a job, and it doesn't have to be a full-time job, it could be an internship or
Right.
what have you, knowing something about the company and being ready to ask a few questions, maybe even asking some questions to the individual about, their role.
Right.
The other thing they said to me was, I talked to them about networking, and I told them the story about the running
yes.
into the CEO of the bank in the elevator. Networking is really important, especially early in your college career, to build a network and take an assessment and inventory of the network you already have. Your
Absolutely.
friends, parents, maybe businesses that you've worked at, professors,
Right.
and build that as quickly as you can because it will help you as well. So that was the couple things. Did I hit them? Was there anything else I missed?
Those are good tools to take with you. Wonderful. Any questions from the audience you want to raise? I'll keep going. They're all scared.
Oh,
So I'll just repeat it for our online folks. What are your hobbies and what do you do for fun?
yeah. So I have a love-hate relationship with golf. That's one of them. And finally, I've gotten to a point where I know I'm not going to be that great, so I'm really enjoying it now.
That's actually good practice on letting it go.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. One
Exactly,
hole's
yeah.
bad, you let it go, you move on.
I spend a lot of time with my family. We're a big dog family, so we spend a lot of time hiking and walking with them. For me individually, snowmobiling. I love to snowmobile. I've snowmobiled all over the place, Quebec, all over northern New England, Wyoming, Montana, Upper Peninsula, Michigan. I would say if there's one thing that is my outlet and kind of takes me back to 16 years old, it would be that. I love to
Sure.
snowmobile.
That's awesome. And just that connection to family as well. And that seemed to be a connection, family for business, right? I mean, with MMG being a big part of that for
Yeah,
you.
for sure. I do. Yeah, it's 18.4. It kind of runs the gamut, though. It can be good some days and be bad others. But I think the thing with golf is I finally realized it wasn't about the golf, that it was about the people you were with and spending 4 hours of that time, and then your whole conduct around golf. Of course, I do it quite a bit for business, and it's been a great way to build relationships too.
Absolutely. And are you playing up north where you're playing half in Canada, half in...
Yeah, we do.
Maine.
It's been a little harder since COVID.
Right.
But yeah, we have a really special golf course up there that we play a lot at, Ristic Valley. Yeah.
It is interesting, the way we network is just what we might choose. So if you're not going to be a golfer, that doesn't mean you can't network in those ways. And I think that's important too. Other questions? Oh, okay, yeah.
I'd like to take you back to your culture conversation and how you were explaining building a culture around your values and give an example of maybe annual awards around your values. I was just curious, maybe you could elaborate that a little bit more and how you find on a day-to-day basis or week-to-week basis you're able to continuously bring in those values in versus a one-off awards. Yeah.
So the question's around your annual awards for values, but how do you actually recognize that day to day, and how do you measure it?
Yeah, so we're once we get them set, we've been talking strategically about how do we embed it. How do you operationalize it, basically. One of the worst things I was talking to students about this is come up with values that are nice posters that you don't live every day. You want to really, really dive bomb a culture, do that. So we spent a lot of time listening to our people of what they defined it as.
Right.
And then we're very, very deliberate in terms of how we articulate it. So community is a value, but also there's a definition of where we focus.
Okay.
So what we're doing right now is we're asking our leadership to make sure they're putting it into their conversations, performance appraisals, calling people out when things are really great against them. You know, I sent out that email this morning, and I always make sure to reinforce within the value. For instance, exceptional experience is one of our values, and like, hey, listen, you upheld that and use that value in the statement.
Sure.
So that's where we are right now. We're talking about some other things too, because I'm really interested in not just me articulating it, but our employees. So we've got this kind of thought process around having our employees talk about them. And, you know, so what does community mean to you? What does family mean to you?
Right.
We just did a big survey of community involvement at MMG, and we asked them, in their words, why do they think community is important as an MMG value, and where do they see themselves? So it's this constant reinforcement and bringing it in. But it's not a big leap because we took so much time and energy and care in defining something that already existed.
Well, and it is interesting when you're thanking people for what they're doing. Sometimes we get into that mindset of either just doing a quick shout out or doing it in writing. I also think there's what are the other modalities that you might do? And so it's nice that you're thinking about how they may bring it forward and what that could look like.
I write a lot of notes to people.
Handwritten ones.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's my Friday thing.
Okay.
I'm in Presque Isle.
Yes.
Promotions, if new addition to their family, if they've had some sort of really hardship.
Sure.
I like written
Yeah.
notes. And, you know, it's sometimes really easy to bust off a text or an email, but a written note has an impact. And I would say any of you students that have a great mentor interaction or a really great interview, send a handwritten note. It makes a tremendous impression.
Absolutely.
And I always try to talk about with the individual something that I've noticed or seen in them as well. That's a big deal. And we're using all kinds of other mediums within MMG with our Teams channels and other things like that. You can never do it too much, though.
Right.
You know, you can never do it too much.
I also think there's about knowing the individuals and how they want to be recognized as an important piece. And
Yeah.
you have people all over the United States at this point working with you. And so some of them may not want to be called out. And so how do you deal with that?
Well, you know, you got to be careful there.
Yeah.
And that's why we talk about modality. You've got to have adaptation relative to it. There are times when I recognize people at quarterly meetings, I'll talk to them ahead of time.
Yeah, by the way.
Just to
I'm
make
going
sure
say
that,
that.
you know, hey, listen, you know, you did a
Yes.
great job. And one of the things we did in the last quarterly meeting, we talked about family, and I recognized children of family members that had done great things recently, either sports or academically.
Okay.
And I front ran that a little bit to make sure everybody was all right with it. But I'm
Sure.
like, this is a big deal. You know, I'm
Yes.
talking about that.
Well, it makes it personal too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think the big thing for us celebrating or recognizing, we're kind of an all for one for all culture.
Okay.
And we try to do it together.
Yeah.
You know, and there's definitely some individualism to it, but our big celebration is talking about us as a whole.
Nice. What else? Other questions from the audience? You can take one more. Yes. What's the best advice
Yeah.
you can give?
Other than get a haircut, right? That was really good advice for me at the time, by the way. You know, I think you've talked to our interns a lot about this coming in. I meet with them every year. I think just making sure that you're engaged, you're taking the opportunity to learn as much as you can about the organization and what you're doing. We have a big thing around continuous education, and of course, we don't get a lot of people that have insurance experience that come to us. We have to teach it. Right. And then being a good team member. One of the things I talk to the interns about is like, okay, if you get a task, don't just do the task and then sit there and wait for something else. Say, hey, listen, I'd like to do more. If you see somebody struggling, say, hey, is there some way that I can help you? And get ingrained into the team as quickly as you can. The other aspect is back to ongoing regard. You know, when you're coming into a company, everybody's busy, and if
Right.
somebody helps you out or explains something to you, send them a note or at least say
Right.
thank you.
Yes.
And that builds your kind of cohesion into the fabric of the company that much faster. But being open to learn, devoting that time and energy, and then making sure you're part of the community of the company, however that's defined, is really important.
Well, hearing that community piece as you're thinking about, I know we've talked a little bit about family, we've talked a lot about work, but what have we missed about Matt?
I think to me, one of the things that I would say is community is really important to me. It has been. It was.
We heard the list of your participation.
Yeah, I know. I was. It was impressed upon me at a very young age that if you're going to be part of society, you got to contribute to community. And you know, unfortunately, you know, based just on the way the world is today, maybe that's not as active as it should be at times.
Right.
But I've always felt like, you know, if you're going to live in a community, you got to give back and you got to contribute. So that's why I do it. And I think the other aspect too, early in my career, being involved in community did great things for me.
Sure.
So we're talking about Hilda a little earlier.
Yes.
So this facility, I knew the individual who was heavily involved in this, knew her really well. I was really young at the time, serving on a board, and she was part of that board. And wow, what an opportunity to learn from someone like
Sure.
that. It stretches you. You know, some of the community involvement I've done, I've purposely gone outside my typical day-to-day box because I wanted that perspective.
Right.
So I think to me, just being part of community is important. And now my big thing is to pay forward the opportunities that I've had throughout my career through, you know, being involved with Leadership Aroostook, which
Right.
we've done together, and
Yes.
very involved in mentoring in the organization, outside the organization. I just think paying it forward now is a big deal too.
And that's, you know, not knowing what you're walking into with volunteering at an organization, you might actually walk into a future job.
Yeah, right.
You know, and so that's one of the things that I always mention to students too, is you never know what
No.
could be there.
No, you don't.
So in our last minute or so, I know you've been asked about advice, but you were how many months in to this role?
Almost 4.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was a big sigh, but they're like, oh.
Well, no, I had to think about it because it seemed like it's been a little longer than that.
Seems longer, yeah. So as you look ahead, do you have anything specific that you're going to be working on over the rest of this first year as CEO?
Yeah, I think the big shift for me right now, a couple of different things: the letting go, being more active in delegating. And it's not that I'm in people's stuff. We're still kind of maybe working too regularly on an operating basis that I've got to start to pull back, but reassure people that it's okay.
Right, because if you're not there, they might wonder, right?
Yeah, and it's like, hey, we're gonna break some china once in a while, but don't get hung up on it. And I find, because I've been there so much with them, that they don't want to be in that position, but I'm opening it up and saying, listen, that's okay.
Yeah.
Because otherwise I can't be what I need to be with the company.
Right.
My other big thing right now is where are we going? You know, where are we going? What are the emerging things that we got to pay attention to? What are the big decisions, the adaptations that need to occur? We just had a big conversation around technology. And we're pretty good, but ChatGPT, AI, robotic process automation, I mean, if we don't get on it, like,
Right.
the world's moving so fast right now that being a fast follower isn't good enough anymore.
Right.
You have to stay on it and ahead, and that's really challenging. Really
Definitely
challenging.
is. Well, I think your what if question will come in handy.
Yeah. The one other thing that I've been focused on too, which I think is really important, coming back to the question on culture, is I'm talking about the why a lot. And I'll tell you what, we're in a very fast-paced, changing environment. If people know the why, there'll be much more adapt to change and step up. So
Right.
I'm literally starting every meeting where I'm talking about things, and I put on the top of the page, the why, question mark. Because that context in retaining culture, kind of that togetherness that we have, and then getting people to understand what we're doing, where we're going, and why it's happening is really, really important. So I've gotten incredibly deliberate around that, just to talk about the why a lot more.
Well, I think that buy-in will serve you well in this next few months, and I'll look forward to kind of getting an update as well. But thank you, Matt, for joining us today. Really appreciated the talk.
Well, and the one thing I want to say before we wrap up is thank you for everything you're doing for Aroostook County, for MMG. Husson is really lucky to have you. And you're in my top 5 academic people that I deal with, and I deal with a lot of them. But just thanks so much what you're doing for employers throughout Maine and the next generation of workforce. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm honored. Thank you all.